Welcome fans of Fate Grand Order, I am Avon, you're watching FGO Tips, and today I want to discuss one of the advantages of using your Saint Quartz for single summons, and how it stacks up against the disadvantages. If you saw any of my last couple of videos, you know I analyzed a bunch of roles and proposed how I think the game enforces their multi-role promises, namely at least one 3-star or above servant and at least one 4-star or above card. Different ways of doing this affect the numbers of different types of cards you'll see, and my theory ended up looking like this. As you can see, one of the advantages to single rolls is the slightly higher chances of pulling a 5-star craft essence. But there is another advantage to single pulls that isn't captured here, and it was pointed out by a number of you. Of course, I'm talking about the ability to stop as soon as you've acquired the card you want. I know, it sounds simple, but it bears at least a quick discussion. So if you're targeting a single 5-star servant and you want to get it using as little quartz as possible, singles might be the way to go. Just remember that you're going to get more junk along the way, particularly more 3-star CEs than you would if you were doing multi-rolls. So how can you decide if it's worth it or not? Let's take a look at some odds. We know your chances of getting a 5-star servant are 1% on each pull, which means there's a 1% chance you get it on the very first summon. In this case, you've only used 3 quartz instead of 30 and you can stop with 27 quartz worth of savings. Sounds fantastic, right? Of course, 99% of the time, this won't happen though, and you'll move on to your second summon. It also has a 1% chance of being a 5-star servant, but now we're talking about 1% of 99%, which comes out to 0.99%. And your odds of getting your first 1-star servant on the third pull, 0.9801%. On the fourth, 0.9703%. By the 9th pull, you're looking at less than 0.93%. And if you succeed on the 10th pull, well, you haven't actually saved yourself any quartz, right? Because it costs you the same as it would have cost you to do the multi-roll. And if you still haven't gotten that card you want yet, well, you keep pulling singles and keep breaking down the odds further. I mean, we could add them together forever until we finally get our 5-star servant, but thankfully, we can calculate the odds without doing that. That's because only the first 10 really matter. The ratio they set up remains consistent no matter how many times we pull another 10 single summons. I'm pretty sure there's a formal law or property that defines this, but I didn't get far enough in my math studies, so if there are any statisticians out there, let me know in the comments. And for everyone else, let's try to walk through this ourselves. The numbers involved in summoning servants are messy, but you can kind of reason through the math using a simpler example if you want to. Let's imagine a hypothetical game where we flip coins over and over again. Suppose we stop as soon as we get a heads, and we win if that's on one of the first 2 flips, but we lose if that's on the 3rd flip. This is kind of analogous to saving quartz on the first 9, but not on the 10th one. You know, we could have done 10 flips, but 3 is easier and faster for the purpose of illustration. So anyway, if we get tails 3 times in a row, we start over again at the first flip, kind of like how after 10 single pulls, we start over again. There's a total of 8 possible outcomes to 3 flips, and if we assume the coin is weighted evenly, all 8 have the same odds of occurring. In 4 of them, we win on the first flip. In 2 of them, we win on the second flip. In 1 of them, we lose on the 3rd flip. And on 1 of them, we start all over. A 6 in 8 chance of winning, a 1 in 8 chance of losing, and a 1 in 8 chance of continuing again. Now, if we do continue again, that 1 in 8 gets further divided into 8 more even chances. And of those, we still have 6 paths to victory and 1 path to failure. The 8th path is split again, and the pattern repeats forever. The ratio is always the same. Our chance of victory is always 6 times our chance of failure. So we can ignore that 1 out of 8 that continues forever and just focus on the other 7. This means 6 out of 7 chances of winning and 1 out of 7 chances of losing. And knowing this, we only have to analyze the first 10 summons to calculate our odds. For any 5-star servant, we have a 90.45% chance of saving quartz, which sounds amazing. And if you multiply the odds by the amount of quartz saved on that particular roll, you can see an average savings of 13.7 quartz. Remember though that this assumes a 1% rate for any 5-star servant. What if we want a specific 5-star servant? Well, if we maximize our odds by rolling when they alone are featured on the rate up banner, we can generously hope for a 0.7% chance on each pull. This means a 90.31% chance of saving quartz instead, and only 9.7 quartz saved on average. Still not bad, right? But before you go thinking I'm advising you to give up on multi-rolls, I also want to point out the fact that these odds assume you will roll forever if necessary until you get that 5-star servant you're after. And unless you've been saving your quartz for years, that's probably not the situation you're going to find yourself in. But wait, I hear you saying. What if I am a whale with no shortage of Saint Quartz, and I will continue rolling forever until I get that 5-star servant? And then I'll stop because also I'm cheap and I want to use a single pull method to save quartz despite being a whale with no shortage of Saint Quartz. Well, first of all, I would say, I don't believe such a person really exists. I find the whole situation to be convoluted, but if you want to indulge your hypothetical frugal hyper whaling fantasies, then yeah, okay, you can use those previously mentioned numbers. For the rest of us, there's another important factor to consider, because we can't actually save any quartz if we don't actually pull that servant. If you only have, say, 30 quartz, you only have a 9.56% chance of getting any 5-star servant, and an 8.65% chance of saving quartz while you get it. Okay, but what if you have more quartz? What if you have 300 Saint Quartz? This is more than what you'd find yourself with if you purchased the most expensive collection of quartz in the NA shop. Twice. It's enough for 100 single summons, and since 5-star servants have a 1 out of 100 chance of showing up, our chances should be pretty much guaranteed, right? Well, not as much as you might think. With 100 summons, you still have an alarmingly high 36% chance of failure. That means you'd succeed in getting at least one 5-star servant less than 2 out of 3 times you tried this. But a 63% chance is still pretty good, right? 90 of those summons give us a chance of saving quartz, while the other 10 will break even with rolling multis. Calculating the odds of saving quartz isn't as simple as multiplying 63% by 9/10 though. This is because the odds of getting your first 5-star servant is higher on the earlier rolls than it is on the later rolls. Now let's be clear about this. The odds of getting any 5-star servant are exactly the same on all of the rolls, so don't go thinking there's a way to boost that. But the odds of getting your first 5-star servant is higher on the earlier rolls. That's because if you get it on the first roll, then you get one on a later roll, it's no longer your first 5-star servant. Anyway, this is actually good news though, because it means we're more likely to get that card that we care about on the first summon when we've only spent 3 quartz than we are on the last summon when we've spent 30 quartz. So our odds of saving quartz is actually a tiny bit better than 9/10. Apply that to a single rate up 5-star servant and your chance of success drops to 50%, only half of the time, despite having 300 Saint Quartz. The odds of saving quartz in this case, 45.9%. Okay, so what's my point in all of this? Yes, single pulls have a good chance of saving you quartz if you actually get the card you want and then stop. But since the chances of getting the card you want are really low, the chances you'll stop before you run out of quartz is also low, and therefore the chances of saving quartz are pretty low, which is why I recommend not letting this factor into your rolling strategy too much. At least for me, the actual odds of getting specific card types is more important when you're deciding how to roll. I try to restrict most of my rolls to banners with great servants and limited event CEs. The big boost to 4-star CEs that you get from multi-rolls makes them worth it in my eyes. But everyone has their own preferences and their own needs, so, let me know what you're planning. The upcoming Camelot banners won't have event CEs, but we're gonna see some really great servants. If you are planning to roll, I wish you luck. If you found this video interesting or useful, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe for more tips in the future, and as always, thanks for watching.